Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I am John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. A good topic? Let's do it. What's an unexplained mystery you have from childhood? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe.
In 7th grade, we did research projects on U.S. presidents of our choosing. I showed up one day we were supposed to present to my class my John Tyler research project. The teacher was picking us in a random order to present, and most of the class had done theirs already, so I was getting anxious, knowing my turn was coming up. So the last person was wrapping up, and I knew I was next, but the teacher stood up and said, "Good job, everyone. Now that wasn't so hard, was it?" I don't remember exactly what he said. This was years ago. I stood up and said, "Excuse me, Mr. Wilson, you forgot me." He said, "No, I didn't. You talked about John Tyler." And I looked around the room for someone to back me up, but they just told me that I had already presented and needed to sit down so we could leave. I couldn't believe what was going on, so I sat down, and to this day, that memory befuddles the shit out of me. I was maybe 3 or 4. We were at my mom's coworker's house for some get-togethers. My coworker's daughter and I were pretty good friends. We decided to play hide and seek with our parents without their knowledge. We got into one of the unlocked cars in the driveway. Eventually, we get bored and start exploring the car. Friend finds nail polish white out, and we start painting our nails. About 10 minutes later, our moms find us, and they have tears running down their faces. They wouldn't tell us why. Later, when I was older, my mom told me that the reason why they were so upset was that one of the compartments in the car that we hadn't gone through was the compartment that had a loaded gun in it. The owner of the car ended up being a good family friend, like a grandfather to me. He never cleaned up the whiteout mess on his dash until he sold the car. He kept it as a reminder to always lock up the gun in his car. I'm not sure why this story sticks out to me in my memory. I just vividly remember the absolute terror my mom had on her face. When I was about 7 or 8 years old, there was this creek in the middle of the forest behind my house that I used to play at all the time. One side of the creek was bordered by a dirt wall about 5 feet high. I used to jump over the creek from one side to the other, as it was fun to pretend like I knew parkour. Then one day I went out to the creek, and lying in the middle of it was a football. Now, I want to mention an important detail. The creek's depth made it so that the top half of the football stuck out of the water. The top half was completely dry, so it wasn't like the ball just rolled into the creek. It was placed there. Where things started to get really weird was written on top of the football in black permanent marker, "First name jumps," and underneath the phrase was a phone number. To make that clear, if my name was Johnny, it would have said Johnny Jumps with a phone number written underneath it. I picked up the football and went home, obviously very confused and kinda scared. Whoever put that ball there had been watching me. They placed it directly where I would jump over the creek when I would play by myself. I grabbed the cordless phone and called the number. It was the number for Homeland Security. Yeah, effing Homeland Security. The effing number that you call when you think a terrorist attack is about to go down. It was basically Super 911, especially seeing how this was only a few years after 9/11. I quickly tried to explain my situation to the lady on the phone, and she told me it was okay, and not to call the number again. I instantly ran and told my mom what had just happened, and she was just as confused as I was. My dad, divorced parents, came over later that evening to drop something off, and I told him what happened. He asked me to give him the football, and he said he was going to look into it. I gave it to him, and he left a few minutes later. Over the next few days, I kept asking him if he ever figured anything out, and he would give me vague answers or try to dodge the question. This turned into a few weeks of me asking, which then turned into a few months, and he then started acting like he didn't know what I was talking about. That was around 10 years ago, and if I ask him about it now, he says he has zero memory of this ever happening. He doesn't remember the football at all. My mom does, but vaguely. To this day, I have absolutely no idea who was watching me, why they put a football in the creek, why they put my name Jumps on the football, and I especially have no effing idea why they put the number for Homeland Security on the ball. I never really thought much of this incident until I was older and realized how effing creepy the whole thing was. I continued to live by that creek for a few more years and continued to play and jump over the creek until I moved away. All of my neighbors were very friendly. White, suburban, upper-middle-class neighborhood, and I knew them all personally. None of them were ever creepy to me, and nothing else strange ever happened in the 12 years that I lived there. Edit. Just to make some clarifications, One detail that I did fail to mention was the condition of the ball. It was brand new. Whoever put it there had gone to the store and bought the football. My dad was actually in the Air Force 35 years ago, but it was a standard position. He wasn't a spy or anything like that. He flew bomber planes. I strongly doubt that the Russians or Iranians of his time somehow found me and chose a football as a way of secretly contacting the US government. I do not think it could have been the older kid or teenager messing with me, as there were no teenagers in my neighborhood. I was the oldest kid. It wasn't the type of neighborhood that other kids from other parts of town would sneak into and play in. It was a pretty private place where every neighbor knew each other by first, and there were weekly barbecues and block parties. I didn't have any neighbors who disliked my family, nor did I have any kids in my neighborhood who disliked me. This story takes place when I was around 8 or 9 years old. One time I was abruptly woken up by something at around 3 in the morning. As I'm readjusting the blankets trying to get comfortable, something caught my eye. My door was cracked and the light coming from the hallway was eerily different than any other night previous. The light fixture around the bulb always made the light have a yellowish tint to it, but tonight it looked pure white. Half asleep but still curious about the white light piercing through the cracked door, I sat up. This is when it got supernatural. The second I sat up, I heard a voice say, "Don't move." Now fully aware of my surroundings, I began to contemplate what I just heard. A million questions went through my head. I decided to test it, and I moved again. I heard that same voice, but this time a little more stern, say, "Don't move." At this point, I'm freaking out. I listed all the people that could be in my house. My dad was the only other male, and the voice was definitely a man's voice. I sat frozen and uncomfortably on my side of the bed for what seemed like an hour. I convinced myself to move one more time. This time, being so hyper-aware of my surroundings, I'd know who it is. And two, I would know where it's coming from. So little Captain Backfire gets ready. I proceed to lay back down. The second my head hits the pillow, he says it a third time. "Don't move," practically yelling this time. I peed myself. At this point, I knew it wasn't my dad because he had a thick accent. I angered this being, and I was too afraid to move anymore. I stayed in that bed with all my senses on high alert until 5 a.m. Being that alert for so long was exhausting work for me, and I eventually fell back asleep. I woke up a couple hours later, damp and still locked in the same position. It was full day now, so I got up and ran out of my room to tell my parents. For the next 2 weeks, I didn't sleep in that room, and my parents, being religious people, got the church involved. We were living in a real old house in Springfield, Illinois. I was probably 10 years old. The previous owner, an old lady, had died in one of the rooms downstairs. This room became my stepfather's office and computer room. We had a giant bookshelf on one side of the door, completely stocked with medical books and journals. Needless to say, it was easily 1,000 pounds, probably more. One day, while on the computer, I got up and walked out of the room to run to the bathroom. I got a few steps away when the door slammed shut and a horrible shaking came from the room. I ran and grabbed my mom, and she tried to open the door while freaking out, convinced someone must be in there, but the door won't budge at all. So we run out to the yard, go to the window in that room, and look inside. The room is empty. The window is still locked from the inside, and the fresh paint over the edge is still sealed. But now the giant bookshelf has been slid 6 feet over, so it's right in front of the door. No books were moved, and it had only been a couple of moments. It would have taken many people to slide that bookshelf when it was empty, let alone with books on it. And here it is moved by itself across the room. My mom is convinced it was the lady's ghost. I myself don't know if I believe that, but it sure is hard to explain. We did have a few other weird things in that house, like smoke that smelled like when they burn in those things they swing during mass, billowing out of the basement one day and then stopped, and when we went down, there was no sign of anything that could have caused it. One weird one for me is that I have extremely vivid memories of hearing voices only when I would drink apple juice. It went away eventually as I got older,
but it would sound like a snippet of someone saying something from really far away. My young mind rationalized that sound waves of people talking from across the world somehow reached my ears and I could hear them. I even remember asking my mom if that was possible. When I was on vacation once, staying at a family member's house, they had a bunch of old toys for me to play with upstairs alone. I specifically remember playing with one that had a really odd face, and it would change every time I looked at it. I also remember it moving right in front of my face. It almost looked like how things morph or move around, like on LSD or mushrooms. I had a dream the same night of being in a new room at the top of the stairs that didn't actually exist. And I was looking down it and could see the toy walking up the stairs. For some reason, none of that scared me until I got older. I hadn't even seen the movie Chucky or anything yet either, luckily, lol. I never had that explained. Also, when I was younger, around 6 or maybe 7, I woke up in the middle of the night sweating in my bed with every single light in my room on. I had no idea what was going on or why someone turned my lights on, so I just got up, turned them off, and went back to sleep. I asked my parents about it the next day, and they just said I was probably sleepwalking, even though I never had before that and never have since. My parents' friends had a daughter who was about 2 years older than me. Our family went on vacation with their family a couple of times. The girl had a small piece of cloth. She told me that the piece of cloth was given to her in the middle of the night by a ghost. The ghost, the girl said, looked exactly like her, but with a different hairstyle. I remember not questioning this at all. I accepted it completely. One time I vividly remember, or badly misremember, but it feels real and vivid, is when me, aged 4 or 5, and the girl were in the back of my mom's car on our way on our holiday. My mom was driving, and the girl's mom was in the passenger seat. Our dads and older brothers were in another car. As we traveled along the motorway toward Devon, the girl said to me, "Watch this." She got a hair clip and wrapped it in the cloth. When I wrapped this cloth around anything, it moved somewhere else, but never very far away. When she unwrapped the cloth, the hair clip was gone. This was amazing to me. We searched all around the back of the car until I found it. It was clipped to my seat belt above my shoulder. I totally accepted that the cloth had powers, but now I see that it was pretty low-grade magic that could easily fool a 4-year-old. Next, she took a toy Matchbox car that I was holding in my hand. It was a model of a green Ford Escort. I still have it somewhere. She put the toy car in the cloth and wrapped it up. When she unwrapped it, the car was gone. This time, though, we couldn't find it anywhere in the back of the car. We searched and eventually gave up. I remember feeling cross that my toy car had gone missing. An hour later, the girl's mother turned around from the front seat and asked, "Is this yours?" in her hand. She had the Matchbox green Ford Escort. She had found it in the glove compartment of the car. "Wow," I said. "I had this in the back of the car, but Sarah disappeared." "No, it was in the glove box," my mom said. This upsets me. I cried a lot. My mom told me not to be silly, and that my car had been in the glove box all the time. The girl's mom said there's no such thing as magic, and the car must have been there since before we set off. What disturbs me is that if it were all a joke, my mom and her friend would have been in on it, and even though I was distressed, they kept up the pretense, even though I was pretty hysterical, or if it was true and the cloth was magic. Let me preface this with the fact that I was having a ridiculous memory. I will state things I remember to my parents now at 18, and they're like, "How do you remember that? You were 3. So when I was 5, we were building a house in a new town and lived with my grandparents while in transition. One night, in the room my baby brother and I shared, I woke up to pee. The bathroom was literally in line with the bedroom door, right across the hall. I proceeded to scooch down the bed to the foot of it and place my feet on the ground, but as soon as I went to put them down, something or some energy pushed me back on my bed. She hurled me back with force, and I was terrified. I called out for my dad, thinking he was trying to scare me, and my father, but there was no answer. Let's just say I didn't pee until the morning, but this has always spooked me to this day, and no one has ever come forth as messing with me. When I was in 5th grade, my teacher once asked me to make a slip of paper down to the teacher's lounge and give it to someone there. I assumed it was something teacher-related and probably uninteresting, but on the way I unfolded it. The only thing written on it were the words, "Keep him there for 15 minutes." My stomach turned, and when I got to the teacher's lounge and passed the note to the other staff member,
She proceeded to fumble around looking for something for 15 minutes and finally handed me an arbitrary stack of papers to bring back to my teacher. When I got back to the classroom, everyone was obviously looking at me in a strange way. A few days later, I asked a friend about it, and he was evasive. I was super paranoid and curious afterward, but nothing else seemed different or out of place. I was always an intelligent kid, and this was long before my adolescent rebellions, etc. To this day, I have no explanation for what happened. Why was I singled out like that? What happened in the classroom for those 15 minutes? Obviously, it concerned me, but then nothing beyond that appeared out of the ordinary. I've moved past it, and it doesn't bother me anymore. Maybe I was picking on someone, and the teacher used it as an example to teach the other kids a lesson about kindness or something. But I wasn't really that kind of kid. At this point, I accept that whatever it was probably had to do with some sort of behavior I had exhibited, and whatever that might have been has almost certainly been drowned in all the development and growth I've undergone in the years since. But still, that question remains open, and I do think about it from time to time. My mom and I had this fairy house that we made by hot gluing a bunch of sticks together and making this cool little hut. I was around 5 or 6. It was kind of like a dollhouse where it's cut in half. It was really detailed. We glued moss on the bottom as carpet. I can remember running into the woods and scraping some off of a rock. And we had tiny pine cone chairs. We removed some of those, I guess they're seeds, anyway, to make it look like a chair. I used some other things and made a table, etc. We put it in the woods near my house in a fairy circle, a circle of mushrooms. It was super cool, and my mom told me that we made it for the fairies, and that because I was so generous and helped make this house from materials from the forest for them and not me, the fairies might leave me gifts, and they did. I got some sea glass, a golden seashell, later discovered to be painted, and some other small knickknacks. Of course, my mom left them out for me. I'd check it every day. She was smart. She spaced the gifts out so that way I wouldn't get bored with them. Eventually, nature took over, and the house succumbed to the elements. But the last time I went to the fairy house, I saw something tiny shoot up into the sky with sparks and glitter-like stuff falling out like a tail, basically like Tinkerbell's pixie dust. I found a crystal left in the house, and I rushed inside to show Mom and tell her about it. She told me later that she had never seen the crystal before and had no idea how it got there. I still wonder if I was crazy or actually saw a fairy. This happened on a military base and a PX shopping center when I was about 5 or 6. My mother told me to sit on a bench that was facing the women's clothes section. She didn't want me following her around the section because I had a bad habit of walking between the clothing racks and scaring ladies who would be casually shopping for clothes. Apparently, that was a no-go on this particular occasion. She wanted me in one location where she could keep an eye on me. Thanks, Mom. Well, I remember sitting on the bench by myself for about 5 to 10 minutes, an eternity to a bored little boy, before another child came and sat next to me. She was about 9 to 11 years old. She had heavily tanned skin. I can't remember whether or not she was Latino or Indian, but I recall her having soft brown eyes and long, silky black hair. So as soon as she sat down, I heard a gurgling noise that I couldn't locate. It was definitely close, but not coming from any of my immediate directions. The sound was simply there, without a source. I glanced over to the girl to give her the "do you hear that too" face? However, when I focused my attention on her, I realized that she was staring at me, as if I were the most interesting thing in the world. No, not her. I realized that a goo cootie eyes, but the eyes of a young girl who were captivated by her favorite preteen television drama. That's when the sound turned into words. And let me tell you, it sounded like one of those smokers' talk boxes. The word said, "Hey, little boy, how are you?" The girl's head tilted to the side as if she was expecting a response, as if the words came from her. At first, being the precocious and inquisitive scamp that I was, I opened my mouth to ask her to teach me how, and I quote, "do ventriloquist speech." However, before I could form a word, the gurgling and mechanical noise emerged again and formed words almost immediately. "Hey, little boy, do you want to play?" The girl's mouth did not move. Suddenly I got this really sick feeling in my stomach, as if something was wrong on a life-threatening level. My body tensed up in fear, and I slowly shifted my neck in a rigid fashion, so that I could focus attention away from the girl. Then the thought came that maybe she was disabled and had a speaking device. I looked over quickly again to answer her, and it didn't seem like I didn't want to talk to a kid that was a bit different. But of course, there was no assisted speech device or anything attached to her. The gurgling voice came out again. "Hey, little boy, do you want to play?" Her smile was soft and welcoming, but for some reason, I felt a legitimate primal fear. At that point, I let out a whimper and a small whine as I got up to speed walk toward my mother, who was less than 30 feet away. When I got to my mom, she asked me why I wasn't sitting on the bench. I have no clue why my mood changed, but I said I was, but this girl wouldn't stop annoying me in a genuinely irritated manner. It was kind of like I completely forgot to be scared of the girl and just found her to be nerve-wracking. My mom gave me the okay to stand beside her and not run off while she finished looking over a pair of blouses. I still don't know how that girl did that with her voice or why it scared me so much.